Winter's unforgiving grip is often underestimated until you're trapped in its icy embrace, alone with the shadows that lurk just beyond the snowdrifts. Tonight, you'll hear 3 true horror stories where cold and isolation bred something far worse than frostbite. Prepare yourself for in the frozen silence. Terror can be deafening. The first story is about a man named Eric who decided to spend a weekend alone in a remote cabin nestled deep in the northern woods of Minnesota. The forest there, known for its biting winter storms and thick layers of untouched snow, attracts those seeking solitude or escape. Eric, an urban escapee and outdoor enthusiast, was drawn by the promise of quiet, the rhythm of crackling firewood, and the purity of frozen air that morning. His plan was simple: to disconnect, explore the snow-covered trails, and return replenished by nature's harsh beauty. On the late afternoon of his first day, the snowfall thickened, curtains of white cascading endlessly from heavy leaden skies. The trees became skeletal sentinels, frosted branches weaving an eerie lattice into the swirling whiteout. Eric returned to the cabin just as dusk settled, the light dimming so swiftly it seemed sudden, unnatural. He lit a fire, its orange glow briefly illuminating the wooden walls and casting flickering shadows that danced like ghosts. As the night progressed, the wind clawed at the cabin's exterior, a relentless howl muffling the stillness. Eric tried reading by the fireplace, but the silence outside pressed too heavily against the walls, unsettlingly complete except for that piercing wind. Then, barely perceptible at first, came the sound's faint tapping on the cabin walls, a rhythmic, deliberate knock that didn't match the storm's pattern. Eric stiffened, heart hammering as he pressed his ear to the door. The knocking ceased. He told himself it was a branch swept by the wind, then shook his head to clear the growing dread. Minutes passed before the tapping resumed, now louder and coming from the window beside the door. The cabin was elevated slightly, the window half covered in frost and ice, but through a thin clearing, Eric swore, he glimpsed a blurred figure just beyond the snowbank. It was motionless, tall, and unmoving, despite the snow swirling violently around it. His breath caught in his throat. Logic warred with the primal urge to flee. He moved slowly to the window and pulled aside a frosted curtain. The figure was gone. Only fresh, deep footprints trailed into the woods too large to be an animal, too oddly spaced to be human. His pulse quickened as the temperature seemed to drop suddenly, a chill that wasn't just from the winter air. That night, Eric barely slept, every creak of the cabin amplified in the oppressive darkness. Just before dawn, when the storm briefly weakened, he heard it again. Low, guttural breathing outside, scraping sounds on the siding. Gathering courage, he grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside. The world was a frozen wasteland, trees bowed under heavy snow, and the moon casting an eerie silver glow. The footprints circled the cabin in a wide ring, ending abruptly near the frozen creek. Eric followed them cautiously, each crunch of snow beneath his boots echoing loudly. Then he saw the mark-steep, claw-like gouges gouged into the bark of a birch tree, unlike anything an animal here could make. Dark stains seeped over the bark, glistening under the cold moonlight. A sudden rush of wind brought a scent something rank and metallic, like iron blood mixed with the cold tang of wet earth. Eric's skin pricked with fear as the crushing silence returned. He turned back, heart pounding, but a shadow detached itself silently from the tree line. It was tall, impossibly thin, and its eyes 2 glowing pale orbs fixed unblinkingly on him. The creature didn't move closer, but the air grew unbearably cold, numbing Eric's limbs. Frozen by terror, he stumbled back to the cabin, slamming the door behind him. For hours he sat by the fire, daring not to look outside. Morning finally arrived, and Eric packed hastily, determined to leave. As he loaded his gear, he found strange scratches on the cabin door, delicate and deliberate tally marks. He didn't stop to count. Driving away, The woods seemed to watch him leave, the snow falling once more in tranquil silence. Eric never returned to that part of the forest. What Eric encountered remains a chilling, mysterious shadow in the snow, something that stalks winter woods beyond human reach. Now, if you had been in Eric's place, would you have stepped outside in that cold terror? What do you think the figure really was? If you're brave enough for more, subscribe and hold tight as our next story begins, this time on a lonely snow-covered highway where isolation masks a different kind of nightmare. Our second true winter horror story unfolds on a desolate stretch of highway in northern Vermont, a road swallowed by relentless snow and ice, where travelers become ghosts themselves, swallowed by the storm. It involves a woman named Jenna, a school teacher driving home after a late Christmas party far from her rural town. The night air was brittle with cold, and the heavy snow had begun falling earlier than predicted, thick and wet, slickening the two-lane road that stretched endlessly ahead. Jenna's headlights barely penetrated the swirling white haze, the beams bouncing back starkly from the powder-filled air. The biting wind howled through the cracked window frame of her aging sedan, making the interior feel smaller, more claustrophobic. She had been driving for over an hour, her fingers numb on the steering wheel, brain foggy with fatigue. The roadside was a blur of tall pines drooping under snow's weight, dark trunks punctuated only by eerie white patches and shadows. Jenna's breath fogged the cold windshield as she wiped it hastily, anxiety creeping in with every blink. Suddenly, the car shuddered violently, sliding toward the snowy shoulder. Panic flared as she wrestled the wheel, managing to bring the car back just before it spun off. Pulling over cautiously onto a cleared stretch, she tried the ignition again, after a moment nothing but a dull click. The battery was dead. Jenna was alone. She locked the doors, wrapped tightly in her coat, and called roadside assistance, but the signal was patchy at best. Minutes stretched longer, the wind outside building to a ferocious crescendo, battering the car like a trapped animal. Then she noticed something outside, a figure slowly approaching through the falling snow. A man in dark winter clothes, face obscured by a parka hood. Jenna's heartbeats slammed louder. She debated rolling the window up, but the figure was mere feet away, waving broadly, muttering something unintelligible. Desperate, she unlocked the door to ask for help. The man stepped inside the light, revealing a pallid, gaunt face with eyes too big and wide, almost glassy. His voice was low, voice brittle as ice. Lost? Need a ride? Something was wrong. Jenna's instincts screamed, but the cold and isolation made refusal hard. She nodded, shivering, and unlocked the passenger door. As the man slid inside, the car's heater coughed to life, and a faint warmth fought the chill. They drove in silence for a while, the only noise the crunch of tires on snow-packed asphalt and the distant cries of wind through barren trees. Jenna tried to focus on the road ahead, but the stranger's gaze weighed heavily on her. His eyes flicked from the road to her face and back again like a predator measuring prey. Suddenly, he broke the silence, his voice oddly calm. Winter roads can take more than just lives. Sometimes they take memories. Confused, Jenna looked over at him, but the air shifted. His features blurred, becoming shadowy, almost translucent. The car's interior grew colder, breath misting rapidly. Jenna's pulse surged as frost began to crawl over the windows like skeletal fingers. She reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The stranger smiled, revealing teeth too sharp to be human. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You're not going anywhere." Panic flooded her senses. She saw flashes of past accidents, flickering streetlights, and lost souls trapped forever on this road during winter's cruelest hours. Jenna realized with horror that she wasn't alone and the man wasn't here to help. Hours passed in a blur. Jenna felt herself fading, as if swallowed by the cold and the dark all around her. When dawn finally broke, a passing truck found the car abandoned, Jenna nowhere to be seen. The vehicle's heater was on full blast, windows glazed entirely with frost from the inside. Locals say on certain winter nights, if you drive this highway alone, you might pick up a passenger you never invited, a remnant of those lost in the ice and snow forever, trapped between frozen breath and eternal night. As Jenna's nightmare ended on that bitter highway, our final story begins far from the rodent, a house no one should have dared to enter during the most unforgiving winter in decades. The last tale unfolds in an abandoned farmhouse, sitting isolated at the edge of a forgotten New England town, where winter's grip had frozen even time itself. Sarah and her brother Mike, amateur urban explorers, ventured into the house one harsh January afternoon, intent on documenting its eerie history and perhaps capturing something unusual on camera. The place had been empty for years, snow-banked in heavy drifts crowding the sagging porch and forgotten pathways. The sky was a slate gray, light falling weakly through thick clouds. A biting wind chased the flakes horizontally, and the two siblings parked their car near the rickety wooden gate, their boots crunching loudly on frozen gravel. Inside, the air was stale and colder than outside, as if the house itself exhaled a freezing breath. Sarah's flashlight swept across peeling wallpaper, frost-covered window panes, and broken furniture tangled in dust and decay. The silence was oppressive, every creak and groan amplified beyond natural limits. They began ascending the staircase, the cold wood moaning faintly beneath their weight. On the second floor, the hallway stretched like a frozen cavern, shadows pooling where the light failed. Sarah paused by a doorway there, shivering not simply from the cold, but an inexplicable unease settling like ice over her skin. The room beyond was a child's bedroom, walls decorated with faded, hand-drawn pictures of snow-covered trees, and a small house surrounded by stick figures bundled in scarves and mittens. On the floor was a rotted wooden toy box, its lid cracked open to reveal broken dolls and a small, yellowed diary. Mike picked it up carefully, flipping through pages brittle with age. The diary belonged to a young girl named Emily, who described winters long ago that weren't just cold, but cruel. How the snow would whisper to her, how shapes moved outside her window at night, and how the house felt like it was alive and waiting. The entries ended abruptly on a single, chilling line. They come when the storm's breath is frozen, and your heart beats slow. Suddenly, the house seemed to shift. The temperature dropped further, and a sound echoed, a faint tapping, rhythmic and slow, like footsteps descending stairs that weren't theirs. Sarah and Mike exchanged nervous glances, their breath visible in wavering clouds. The tapping grew louder, gradually turning into a shuffle, then dragging a heavy, labored rhythm that filled the hallway. The siblings froze as a door slammed violently somewhere below, shaking the floor with impact. Sarah's flashlight flickered erratically, casting spinning shadows that stretched impossibly long. "We should leave," Mike whispered, his voice trembling. Sarah nodded, and they hurried down the stairs. As they reached the ground floor, the front door they had entered through was slammed tight, frozen shut despite their earlier ease. They pulled, pushed, but it wouldn't budge, as if an unseen weight pressed against it. The air grew thick, and from the corner of the room came a faint, chilling giggle, childlike, but warped, distant, yet inside their heads. The temperature dropped so rapidly, their breath froze mid-exhale. Then shapes coalesced in the dimness. Translucent figures, snowdrift pale, eyes hollow and unblinking, circling slowly around the two trapped explorers. Mike fumbled for his phone to call for help, but there was no signal, only static growing louder in the earpiece. Suddenly, the last lights on their devices flickered and died, plunging them into darkness complete, but for the faint glow of spectral figures drifting closer. Hours passed like minutes. When dawn finally bled pale light through frosted windows, The house was silent again. The front door was unlocked, hanging ajar as if it had never been sealed tight. Outside, the snow lay undisturbed except for 2 sets of footprints leading away, rapidly fading under new snowfall. Sarah and Mike never spoke much about what happened in that house, but the diary remained with the myth's final page stained and torn. The last written words smeared impossibly. Frozen. Winter's hold can be merciless in more ways than one. These stories remind us that in the coldest season, loneliness and isolation often invite shadows darker than the longest night. If you've made it this far, make sure you're subscribed for more chilling journeys into true horror. Which of these frozen nightmares chills you to the bone? Let us know down below. Resuming our dive into the unknown, the chilling isolation of Eric's cabin is just the beginning. After that terrifying night, he told no one of the strange figure and the clawed tree. What haunted him most wasn't the encounter itself, but the silence that followed days stretched without any sign of life or normalcy. On his final morning, Eric awoke to a deep stillness, a suffocating quiet unlike before. The storm had abated, and the sun's weak light shimmered across the endless snowfields. But the footprints he'd seen before were now scattered with dozens of smaller, unrecognizable tracks, circling the cabin like a predator mapping its territory. When Eric finally left, the oppressive cold seemed to cling to his clothes and skin, a reminder that whatever he faced existed beyond natural law. The stories of the woods where he stayed tell of entities that used the frost and silence to lure victims away from safety, creatures born from winter's cruel heart. Meanwhile, across the miles, Jenna's sinister hitchhiker remained a grim warning about trusting strangers in the cold. Investigators retracing the highway found ghostly tire tracks disappearing into snowbanks and discovered several abandoned vehicles with no signs of their owners. Local lore now speaks of the Snow Rider, a phantom driver who preys on the isolated during whiteouts, stealing warmth and memories alike. Such tales have baffled folk for decades, blending real tragedies with whispers of otherworldly forces. And then there's the farmhouse Sarah and Mike's unsettling experience. Remains one of the most documented hauntings in the region. Paranormal researchers later found that the diary's author, Emily, had disappeared in a winter storm over 70 years ago. Her body never recovered. Some believe her spirit and the spirits of children lost in the cold are trapped in that house, reliving their last frozen moments. Winter, it seems, is not just a season to brace against, but an active presence haunting, watching, waiting. These stories show that the terror of winter goes beyond frostbite and hypothermia. It strikes at the soul, leaves marks unseen, and invites creatures that thrive in silence and snow. What if Eric's shadowy visitor still roams those woods? What if Jenna's passenger rides those icy roads tonight? And what if the children from the farmhouse beckon still, inviting others to join them beyond the frost? As these stories remind us, when the cold settles and the world quiets, fear grows deeper instead of fading. Next, brace yourself for the lonely highway where Jenna's chilling encounter warns there are no simple escapes. The highway stretched ahead, coated in ice and slick with freshly fallen snow that muffled every sound but the faint hum of frozen wind. Jenna's tale of the hitchhiker was a haunting reminder of winter's hostile loneliness, but there's more. After the disappearance on that fateful drive, the highway took on a life of its own, a place where reality seems to slip. Eyewitness accounts emerged of cars stopping unexpectedly for a shadowy figure waving in the blowing snow, only for the passenger to vanish from the seat mid-drive. Drivers describe a strange frost that clings to the inside of windshields, breath that fogs instantly, and subtle changes in the radio's static whispering more than just noise. One story tells of a trucker named Carl who, during a whiteout storm, saw a child standing in the empty lane ahead. He swerved to avoid hitting it, but couldn't find anyone when he stopped. His dashboard camera recorded faint voices and a cold shimmer flowing over the road. Carl's rig stalled soon after, leaving him stranded until help arrived hours later. The locals warn, don't pick up strangers here in winter, because sometimes the cold itself isn't the only danger. The highway carries the memories of lost souls trapped by storm and ice, lingering in the shadows between life and death. Jenna's vanishing on that night remains an uneasy mystery, a ghost story rooted in too many strange facts and too few answers. Perhaps the snow rider is less a specter and more a warning, a manifestation of winter's unforgiving heartbeat. As darkness creeps in, so does the sense that the cold is never truly gone carries echoes, footsteps in the snow, and the breath of beings unseen. From the lonely road, we turn to the deepest chill of all, a house where winter never ends, and the past refuses to stay buried. Sarah and Mike's journey into the abandoned farmhouse will freeze your breath, sear your skin, and haunt you long after the last page of Emily's diary is closed. Before we step inside, remember to like and subscribe if you haven't yet. Which winter terror chills you the most so far? The shadow in the trees? The ghostly passenger? Or the literally frozen remnants of a forgotten past? Let us know below. The frozen house sat like a tomb, untouched by time, but filled with echoes of life once lived and lost. Sarah and Mike's experience revealed how some cold places don't just preserve bodies, but the very souls trapped between winter's icy grasp. The diary they found was a key telling of Emily's fear and confusion, but also her longing to be free. Paranormal experts who investigated later described the air inside the house as unnervingly cold, far below the external temperature, and noted strange electromagnetic readings near the child's bedroom. The siblings' encounter with the spectral figures who circled them was more than a haunting. The footprints outside, fading beneath fresh snow, spoke of a temporary escape, but not a full release. The house remains an ominous warning. Some places in winter don't just freeze water, but time, memory, and pain. Winter shapes fear uniquely. In daylight, cold is simply discomfort. In darkness, it transforms into a predator, magnifying loneliness, twisting shadows, and exposing primal fears. The three stories shared tonight stir the frostbite of the soul. Woods haunted by beings that watch silently. Highways haunted by lost travelers who never truly left. Homes haunted by the echoes of frozen children. These are not myths or fanciful tales. Each is drawn from true accounts, reminders that winter's quiet is deceptive and that beneath snow's tranquil veil lies a realm where horror thrives. So, pause before you step out into the cold next time. Listen closely, because in the silence, terror might just be waiting. Thank you for joining us tonight. If these stories sent a chill down your spine, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for more true horror experiences. Share your thoughts and winter nightmares in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the cold isn't what ends your story, it's what never lets it go. Until next time, stay warm, stay safe, and beware the winter silence.